My name is Michael Chui. I'm a partner at McKinsey Company. I'm also privileged to be a member of the advisory board of Asia Society, Northern California. And again, thanks to everyone who's made this possible. I'll ask, if I might, my other members of the panel to introduce themselves, and then have a conversation about this topic, and then we'll open it up for questions from people who are here as well. So, Shie, feel free.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. I'm Shie Lundberg. I'm from Google. I'm a director of Google for overseeing the consumer care, which means that all the consumer products you might use of Google, we might be supporting you whenever you have a trouble. I started my career at Google in Japan, in Tokyo office actually, and I moved back to the Bay Area this spring. So looking forward to talking with you.
Hi, I'm Steven Vogel. I'm a professor of political science at UC Berkeley. I work on Japanese political economy. I've written a book called Japan Remodeled about Japanese economic reforms, and I'm currently working on a new book looking at both U.S. and Japanese market reforms and market structures.
Terrific. Well, we've talked a little, you've introduced to us some of the things that are happening already, but I'd love to have each member of the panel maybe just step back a moment, and if I could ask, on gender equality, what's going well, and where are there more opportunities, I guess might be one way to put it. Shie, we'll start with you. All right.
What's going well? So every time I go to the conference with women, they are the most motivated, passionate people. So what I think is changing is that the mindset of women themselves, they know that they have to get their career, they know they have to fulfill their life, and this mindset and intention really are changing things. And I think that's going really well, and I'm looking at my team globally, and then they are really like talented, motivated women that we have to promote. What's hard, especially related to Japan, I think is fast, long working hours. And that's primarily the responsibility of management, if you are managers. And it's really hard because, especially in Japan and also in other Asia countries, women were traditionally positioned as caregivers, either for the child, husband, and also elderlies. And it's just not possible to stay until 12, like midnight, to work and then, like get yourself promoted and, advance. So I think that really needs to change in my mind.
Well, I think what's going well is that this issue is getting a lot of attention. And there's actually a very strong consensus in favor of making positive changes in terms of improving women's participation in the workforce, women's participation in leadership roles. So that's really, really a good sign. And the government has also been taking action, particularly in terms of childcare leave. The policies are now up with some of the better standards in the world. So there's been real progress. I think that there's still room for the government to do more. I mean, one obvious area is the government itself. Japanese women are still not represented in leadership positions, obviously in politics, but also in the bureaucracy, the civil service. And there's some areas where the Japanese government is certainly moving in the right direction, but maybe not. The budget allocations are still not sufficient, or sometimes the enforcement is not as tight or as tough as it really needs to be. At the company level, obviously, Sasaki-san talked about this, but it's hard to change, a long legacy of practices. And so I think change is incremental rather than dramatic. And there's just people's patterns of behavior, right, at the company level. Also, sometimes the women themselves in terms of aspiring to go up. That will take a while to change, but the current trend at least is positive.
Yes, I totally agree with you that the good points is that this issue is finally get attentions to it. 30 years ago, no male would be talking about this, or no business leaders. When I started my conference 20-some years ago, I was told by the major economic associations that you shouldn't, Sasaki-san, you shouldn't start that kind of conference because that those people who may come to the conference are the dropout of the Japanese mainstream economy. Those people could be an entrepreneur, could be a small, medium size of companies, could be a foreign capital companies, and those are the dropout of the Japanese economy that the big companies in Japan wouldn't be interested in. You shouldn't start a conference. Me being an entrepreneur, when I listen to those people that trying to persuade me not to start, it's so weird. And it's that was my became like, oh, maybe that they are so scared of that kind of power, so I should start. And so that's why that I started. But so 20, 30 years ago, nobody would really pay attention. But now that because of the Prime Minister's announcement, the big economic association has been taking leadership. They appointed women as a vice president, and then many laws and policies are started. So yes, this is a big step. And at the same time, what we have to work on is the longer working hours. It's true. And then in order to do that, in order to fix that, the government has to actually change the labor law. That Japan, people are applying for cooperation, not to the job. So this is really the hard part of like a gender gap, pay gap, and so forth. When you are applying for a company, and then the labor law says that you cannot hire anybody, not many people as a yearly salary, but more like hourly salary. So the longer hours you work, the payment is more. And also seniority system. When you graduate from university, you go into a company right after. If you miss 1 year, then you are not really, you are considered as a little bit of failure of the society. So that all the students are really putting a lot of effort to go into a company right after graduation. Then they do not want to miss any year because the seniority system doesn't really necessarily related to productivity. So you don't want to leave the company, you don't want to miss days or months of the companies, and you just stay there for years and years, and your salary goes up. So we have to change the regulations and policies by the government and also the companies, major companies, to change this freshman out of college and the evaluation and paid salary.
Very good. Well, let's come back to the hard stuff. Some people say that one way to make progress is to do more of the things that are working well. So you've all mentioned a change, right? I mean, the Prime Minister talks about womenomics, right? It's remarkable. What has changed? Why did that happen? And you know, how can you build on that momentum?
Well, again, because of the Prime Minister said that is really the big thing. That this kind of talk was there for the last maybe 10 years. Some of the ministers have said, and some of the newspaper have said, some of the women leaders have said, but finally the Prime Minister said that this is economic issues and really important to do that. And he didn't say it only once, but he said it in several times, and here and there, in UN and so forth. So that kind of leadership and then leader pressure, actually, to the male leaders are the key. Were the key.
So leadership is an important thing, and leadership by men as well as women.
Yeah. The men. Men are the decision makers in Japan. So, yes.
Maybe that will change. Shie, any thoughts?
Yes, I agree that the leadership is very important, and they are declaring this issue being important is really important. I think also the companies can play big roles here. So, for example, I'll share a couple of examples from Google Japan. We had 2 initiatives to encourage women to come back to work from the suspension of the work. Like one is called Happy Back to Work campaign. You might see some commercials in YouTube or TV. It's encouraging women to safely and securely coming back to work and feel like welcomed and then mingle to the work, and then also feel free to tell their needs, like what kind of help they need. So We did it with like more than 400 external partners, big companies in Japan, and there are thousands of ideas of how to help women, like gathered through the web and through the commentary and then like meetings. And this really like enhanced the culture of like, well, this is the right thing to do. This is the thing that should be a norm, right? The other side, we have a program called G-Career, which started in 2013 in Google Japan, and now it's expanded to India, which is an internship for professionals who are out of work for more than 6 months. So if you are out of work for more than 6 months and you are planning to come back to career, you are qualified to apply. And we got lots of applications. And this is the internship for professionals to work for 30 hours a week for 16 weeks and more. And then some people actually come back and as a full-timer. So these are the initiatives that we are trying to do, and lots of companies are interested to do the same thing.
Steve, can you talk more about the political context in which this is occurring? What happened here?
Sure, I would be delighted. I mean, one of the things that's been interesting, and why I describe this as a consensus, is because there's always been a progressive voice in Japan that's argued that women should really have equal opportunities, not just in law, but in fact, in reality. So that's not really new, but you've had this kind of interesting political coalition where now you also have what you might have called more conservative voices also pushing for it, maybe for more practical reasons, but it's still a positive thing. In other words, you've got people who are worried about the birth rate, who realize that if you want more Japanese women to have children, then you've got to create an environment in which women are comfortable working and combining, right, work and family. So that really takes a fundamental transformation of the policy atmosphere, and so people are realizing that. And then there's kind of more practical economic motives, I think, which is driving some of the changes in the last few years, particularly under Abenomics, which is that you've got a looming labor shortage, so you need more women in the workforce. You have kind of tepid consumption, and so I think there's a reality that actually more enlightened policies on family and welfare would actually create the security that people need. People aren't going to spend money if they're economically insecure. So that's a motive. And then I think also just in terms of productivity and economic growth, if the population isn't growing, the one way that you can kind of address that is to increase the workforce. And the obvious way to do that would be to increase female participation in the workforce. So you've got all these different motives that are kind of coalescing and pushing in the same direction. And I think that's why you've got this stronger push from the government, because there's people who are motivated for different reasons, but they're all kind of pushing the government in the direction of better policies for women and better policies for families.
So I'm curious, you talked about labor force participation, particularly by women, and some of the research that we've done shows, roughly, and you should correct me if I'm wrong, right, at university graduation rates, it's close to 50-50. Entry-level professionals, 45-55, again, close to 50-50. But by the time you reach management ranks, it drops down to, call it 11-10% or something like that. Could you talk more about what that dynamic is, and what might potentially, how could that change?
Well, again, like because of the payment or evaluation system is evaluated by usually the male, the senior, right? And then and also payment is according to how many hours you work. So yes, there are so many friendly policies, and then women can work in a variety of way of working. However, that when HR section or your division leader would evaluate you, then it's really biased. It's natural that the biased by the person's point of view. The leader's point of view, which is like maybe he would like to see his their colleagues together with him in the office for long hours. Then if woman goes home or in the 5 o'clock to pick up the babies, then maybe he doesn't think that she is working hard enough. So that kind of thing is a really the course, we have to change the productivity base rather than seniority base or the hour base, and that's the key.
How does that change happen?
Well, I am saying that Japan has to change the name of the family leave. Family leave, legally, it's called family leave, right? I mean, or childcare leave. Leave sounds like you are off the work. But if you call it diversity training term or something like that, so that they would go home, they would take like a 2-month absence from workplace, but actually taking care of the babies and walking around and do a lot of things about childcare and around your house with your wife, then he may learn a lot of things and expand his ideas and network and so forth. That will be, of course, beneficial for the company in the future because he's now have a vast network and flexible thinking and so forth. So if as long as you are thinking it's a leave from the business, maybe company do not want many men to take. But if that is a training term, like your company may send your men into China because it's a new market, development market, they may send your stuff to a university in the United States, graduate school in the university to study more. So it's that kind of like a little difference of changes in the mind. It's the key.
Branding. Shie, thoughts?
I agree with Kaori more about biases. So I think everyone has biases. Everyone has unconscious biases, or sometimes conscious biases. The thing is, like, I think we have to each ask ourselves, are we assuming that women with little children cannot travel more, or cannot work long hours, or cannot take more responsibilities? Because you have to ask that individual, right? First of all, you have to ask it first. And you cannot assume, oh, she cannot take more responsibility because she just have 2 little young kids at home. No one, should assume that. And I think those things are the first thing that we also have a training of unconscious bias at Google. But because these are like the modern world, and then the parenting is a responsibility of both, like male and female. No one should assume that the women should sacrifice their career or advancement or opportunities for whatever the blockers they have. And also we should think about how can we help as a company, management, peers to make them enable their potential. And so that's the, I think what we can do as individual as well as institution. The other thing is we also know that women don't go for promotion, for example. They don't ask for promotion compared to men, like a lot less. I studied and tells us. And this is also, I think, preventing the opportunity to unlock. So I think both sides really needs to know that there shouldn't be anything to stop seeking opportunities for women. And if there's a blocker, company, manager, spouse, family, they should all come together and think how to solve it, because we are basically wasting vast majority of talents who can bring the diverse, great perspective to the world, and that would really help us to innovate our products, innovate the support, innovate the services. So I think it's such a waste, and we should all change our mindset system.
So I think one of the biggest problems of all is the dual nature of the Japanese labor market. That there's kind of 2 tiers of workers, the permanent or regular workers, and then the non-regular workers. Often the non-regular workers are full-time, so it's not necessarily a differentiation between full-time and part-time. It's a matter of employment status, so the level of security, the level of salary, and the level of benefits are all lower for the non-regular workers. And this correlates very strongly with gender, right? So men are disproportionately the regular workers, and women are disproportionately the non-regular workers. About 80% of men are regular workers, about 45% of women are regular workers. So that means the rest are non-regular workers. So this creates a lot of problems in terms of women's advancement, kind of at every level, right? At the original level of recruitment, you have companies that, even though obviously gender discrimination is illegal, companies will disproportionately be inclined to take men for the career track. Then at the level of, at the stage of maternity, right? There's a problem of a kind of an expectation on the company's part that the female employee on the career track is likely to leave or should leave or whatever, right? So you've got to kind of get past that. And then from the perspective of the core worker who's female and has a family, you have the problem that those regular workers, we've discussed working hours, but I think it even goes beyond that, right? In terms of expectations about you should be ready to move anywhere at any time, and kind of sacrifice your family life for your job. That just makes it an environment that's not attractive for a woman who's trying to combine a career and family. So that's kind of a deeply embedded problem. It's obviously the government and the companies are aware of this, but it's not going to change overnight.
So if I understand correctly, the non-regular workers are particularly susceptible to the more you work, the more money you get. Is it?
Well, if you're a non-regular worker, you're kind of locked into a lower tier status, right? Because you don't have the job security, you don't have the same level of salary, you don't have the same level of benefits. And while theoretically it might be possible to switch to move into the career track, that's very hard to do in practical terms.
So let's come back to this long working hours. Kaori, you suggested there are some regulatory things that can be done, partly addressing some of the regular versus non-regular distinctions, which are partly supported by regulation. But is it not also true that probably there's more to it?
Well, it's a very they're complicated issues that I used to be working for the as a council members of the Regulatory Reform Council, and I've been working on this labor issues for 3.5 years. But when we would like to reform, deregulate those hourly workers or to more like a freedom of the work, then we do have a strong against opinions from like a labor union. They were afraid of those companies as asking employees longer work hours at home or other places if there is nothing to do with the hours they work. You know what I'm saying? That now almost all those workers are paid by hour, so that as we were working longer than 8 hours a day, you automatically receive the overtime payment. But if you are hired by monthly salary fixed or yearly salary fixed, there are some opinions that maybe bad companies may force employees to work long hours. So because of that kind of opinions, that most of the workers have to be hired by hour. And then not really nothing to do with productivity. That is actually accelerations of the long working hours. It's because it's more pay, and then also that the men's do not have a custom of going home early. I was at I think that also that the very important thing is a family value. That when I had the opportunity to speak in front of a lot of men about the issue of diversity, I asked the audience that how many of these the male gentlemen here have had dinner together with your family in the weekdays at home, like 6 and 7 o'clock. Not many Japanese working men have an opportunity to have dinner at home, like or with their wives or children. if the kids are educated among that kind of like family, I mean, if you were a child, you never have a father sitting at the dinner table. If you become an adult and a company told you that, no, we are pushing the work-life balance, you go home and have dinners, and they never really experience having that kind of occasion. So that his family values and is also very core issues of stopping men to put effort to make a short working hours.
I found it a little bit remarkable that one of your good examples was make sure people are done by 10 p.m.
Right. That was it, right.
Shie, some...
Yeah, I had this.
Because Googlers work long hours, too,
Well,
right?
depends on which Googlers. And yeah, I have a very funny example from recent. So we were going through performance evaluation period. I was giving the feedback to my reports, and a couple of my reports said, Shie, you are working late lately. I see you in the office at 7 p.m. I think you're not setting the good example. And I'm like, thank you for the feedback. It was supposed to be feedback for them, but they gave me the feedback, and I'm like, great. I'm going to leave at 5:30. From tomorrow, promised. I'm not going to break it. So it's this like kind of like, relationship, like psychological safety for them to say that to me, and that's super important. And I think Google broadly have that culture. And I sent an email to my VP and HR right after that meeting, said, my team is saying that I'm not setting the good example. I'm going to leave at 5:30, and I'm not going to work in the weekend. Are you supportive? And they're like, absolutely supportive, 100%. Right? So that norm needs to be there, and I'm really...
That never happened in Japanese companies.
I think we have to make it happen, and I tried to make that happen in Japan office. I think that was massively effective. Couple of other things I think systematically need to happen too. That, for example, I think lots of companies here are like that, but in Google, you don't tell your boss when you are taking off. You just enter in the system when you are going to take the PTO, paid time leave, and then you just take it off. There's no approval, right? That should be the norm, right? And then I have to, as a manager, figure out what to do when my team member is out. And the other thing is, if you have to work from home, in my team, you don't need to tell your boss, like at least up to 2 days a month, you can just work from home, right, without telling your boss. That kind of flexibility allow people to do their chores, or like carpenter is coming to my house and fixing my furniture, all that stuff. They have all those stuff, right? So I think that kind of things need to be built into the system. And I'm actually really happy that I don't need to approve another approval that I have to, give. So it's saving time for both of us. So I think those things should be highly encouraged and used, and give the flexibility to the workers to choose where they work from and how they work. And I think eventually my hope is that would cut work hours and increase the productivity.
Yeah. Kaori, if you don't mind, you mentioned, the scenario that Shie talked about would be, if not impossible, surprising to find in a traditional Japanese company. Is there any hope?
Well, I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm always hoping to and working on it. But again, like Japanese, the people, we apply not for a job but for a company, kind of, so that the decision-making process is not that easy. I mean, clear than the other Google. That because I've been searching why Japanese people has to look for long hours. Japanese people are that inferior to or lower ability to the world, or what. But the reason is, I think that I come up to one result, that the Japanese companies, that people has to approve each other. You have to ask one person's signature for one issue, and not only that, you have to go to another person to get the signature, and then third person to explain in signature, so that the one process, one work you have to do a lot of things. If like a Google, that's just not even like a request, no need to request approval, is of course that will be simple. I don't know how many Japanese company can do that in
Yeah, I have a
100
little
years.
comment there. So I almost think, this is my personal opinion, but I think that managers should be evaluated on how much vacations their reports are taking.
Right.
Or is paternity leave consumed fully? Or is maternity leave consumed fully? Managers should be evaluated, and if they are not consumed fully, they should be questioned.
Right.
Right. I think that would really change the behavior of the company.
Some of the Japanese companies have started doing that. That if the workers are taking long hours, working long hours, and you are bad evaluation for the manager.
I spent some time in a Japanese company, and they would turn off the lights at a certain time in order to try to encourage
right.
people
However, that the turning off the light is also another meaning that you have to have your own light to work, or you can bring your personal computer to home and work continues. So the company is not paying you, but you have to work.
I think that the white-collar exemption that Kaori mentioned is a great example of kind of the dilemma from the government's point of view about what to do about this. Because this hasn't happened because, precisely as she said, it's quite controversial. But the idea is that they would exempt white-collar workers from overtime bonus pay, right? And you can kind of see how that's a double-edged sword, right? Because ideally, that would cut back on overtime because the workers would think that they're being paid according to what they do rather than the hours they put in. But on the other hand, it's also taking away a protection because it's taking away the bonus pay that you get for working overtime. So that's the dilemma. And I think ideally you would sort it out by really thinking about what's the nature of this particular worker, right? Because if you're really a manager, it doesn't make sense to be paid on an hourly basis. But something lower than that, it does. So it's a very tricky thing to think about how to do that properly. One proposal that they are thinking about that I think is quite clever is that for those workers who aren't at the white-collar level, they're talking about actually increasing the overtime bonuses for work past 60 hours a week, right? So I think it's 25% for past 40%, and then you get a 50%. So it's kind of like penalizing companies for overworking their non-managerial class workers. And so that seems like a kind of a clever way to both send a signal and actually create a real penalty.
People, do they get paid for the client work between 8 and 10? That's unpaid too, I presume.
What's that? Yeah, they are paid. I'm sure they should be paid.
All right. But let me come back to one other topic, and then I want to open it up. And this is the topic of unpaid work, which is caring, whether it's caring for children, caring for elders, etc. And Kaori, you had mentioned there's some progress being made in terms of childcare, but broadly speaking, women disproportionately do this type of unpaid work. And so, wondering from each of you, to what degree is there an opportunity for a market to be created for, some of this unpaid work to perhaps become paid work, which might perhaps free up more opportunities for women in the workplace?
That is really now come up to depending on the family or a couple of the mind. Yes, as a business, that a lot of babysitting companies have started in giving services, and also domestic helping companies in doing like cleanings and doing washes and whatever. Mainly in Tokyo or those big cities, women started using that services. But because Japanese houses are so small, some of the families do not really want anybody to come into their houses. And then sometimes husband or wife believe that those are the things that they have to do or she has to do. So that it's gradually expanding, but it's not that come yet. Also, that the foreign helper, if Japan have to open door for domestic helper from like other Asian countries and others, that is also another issue that we've been discussing. I myself have a Filipino helper once a week. 4 or 5 hours to just clean up the room because my kids are already big. It's not rare in Tokyo around me, but maybe it's very rare when we see that the whole Japan. So again, that the business should be there, and the service should be more variety of services should be there, but at the same time, a lot of mindset should be changed. Yeah, that.
How do you change mindsets?
So old saying, like I saw it in some articles, so it says like men take charge, women take care. And I think that needs to be totally like flipped or totally like neutralized. I outsource everything, right? I outsource lots of things to my husband, but also to like a maid and cleaners and then drivers. And I think what helped me is seeing the role model of women doing that already. Because especially like as starting career in Japan, traditionally, like we had this feeling of guilt that, oh, I shouldn't be outsourcing. My house should be cleaned by me. My kid should be like taken care by me, right? Otherwise, it's not good enough of the care. But that perception needs to be challenged. Who knows if my husband's better than me, right? In terms of like teaching my kid, and he's actually very good. And this perception really needs to be changed between partnership, like me and my husband, but also like as like organization, culture, like community, because I had lots of like female, like new managers, entry-level managers coming to me and said, I don't know if I can do it. I feel really responsible for my kid and I have to take care. And they get really shocked when I tell them that I outsource most of those things. And they're actually very good, probably better than me for lots of things, like cleaning or cooking or driving, right? So I think seeing the role models who are already doing it and then like coping with it and they earning the result that they want to see really helps. Otherwise, those women, especially in Japan and Asia, lock themselves in this perception that if I don't fully pay attention, it's not good enough, which needs to be really challenged. It's often not true. So that's what I think.
I mean, this is a huge problem because obviously, traditionally, Japanese women, the daughters and the daughter-in-laws, are the ones who are expected to take care of the elderly. And it's a problem that I think Japan has been aware of, not just in the last few years, but for quite some time. There was an important law that was passed in 1997, which is a nursing care law, which was actually quite expensive, whereby the government helps to subsidize care worker visits to kind of take a little bit of the burden off of that daughter or daughter-in-law. But what they're thinking about now is they're starting to, again, because they're more concerned about also the labor market issues, that career women are quitting their jobs because their parents need their help. And so they're trying to see, well, how can we change policies? So along with the child care allowances, they're now working on elder care allowances to try to find ways for, that families can kind of get past that, and also to extend those parent care leaves, not necessarily full time, but where, for instance, a worker might be able to leave at whatever 4 or 5 p.m. for several years if that's what's necessary, and that with this kind of this approval that there's a reason for that, and so that the company should accept.
The parental leave or elderly care is a matter for men as well, and we call it the sandwich. The generation is often called for women to take care of children and also elderly care. But a lot of men in Japan are now quitting jobs because of the elderly care. So that the companies just started to take it seriously because it's men's issues as well, finally. So that a lot of companies have started to work on these issues and maybe flexible hours and so forth.
Great. All right, I want to open it up to people in the room. If you have questions, would be delighted to please raise your hand. And a microphone will be on its way. Right here. We need it for the video.
I was wondering whether there have been surveys, and there perhaps have, if you ask women, would you go back to work if? Like, what are the main, I mean, there's so many potential barriers you could talk about. There are, I have to care for my family, or I wouldn't want the long working hours, or re-entry is simply too hard, or I actually enjoy my life as a mother and taking care of my child. Because there are some women, and there are many in San Francisco, Stanford MBAs and lawyers who choose to stay home because they have that privilege. Now that's but what really, if you dig down into it, what is in the women's hearts? And I really would like to do this, but I can't, or I'm very happy with, kind of things as they are because I wouldn't want to have to go to a company and work till 10 o'clock. Is it just like the third thing that they haven't thought of, which is, wow, what if I could have a career that gives me satisfaction and have this? But that might not even be in their consideration, that they could have both.
I really think that the freedom and choices is really important. If the woman is choosing what she is doing, which is either the working for a company or staying at home, if she is really believing and knowing and realizing that this is her choice, this is the happiest thing, I think that is fine. However, some of the women in Japan never really thought of the possibility of working while taking care of kids. So that, for that kind of women, I think that the informations or showing the role models, and also that the conference that I organize is really important, because I don't want to force somebody to come to our conference. I would like somebody who wants to come, and then enjoy meeting with people, really listen to 50, 60 different speakers, and then the attendance actually from 15 years old to 80 years old, and the variety of people from various industries, different nationalities, and all over the world. Then finally, the open eyes for them that, maybe there are other choices. Those women are not, boring women who are just working. She is, look at her, and she's really smiling, enjoying, a charming woman who is taking leadership in the big companies and still having, child and a happy life. And that's possible. And that kind of role model and show and meeting is really important for those people who did not think that they are choosing what they are doing.
I think it's really important to make it proportional to men and women, right? If you have to do 2 jobs, that's hard, right? And one is unpaid. And if you are the only one who are always given that choice of, you can work, but you have to do 2 jobs, one is unpaid, how many men would sign up for it, right? So we have to think about it. And if it's shared burden, right, the family things is mutually shared, then everyone has the opportunity to choose whatever they want to do. And then many men might choose, okay, I'll take 2 years off from my work and I'll really bond with my kids. But we are not giving the choice to men either by making it disproportionate. So I think that's where I would like to see the society and community change. And I think men has their equal burden as women to institute that change.
In Japan, the family is considered as one unit, and then there's a lot of tax benefit as well. That the very unique tax benefit is if women work below than a certain amount of money, then men receive the benefit. But it's some kind of like the magic that because of that tax benefit, women think that it's beneficial for him or us if I do not work hard, right? But they're thinking about it. You will never know that you will be marrying to that person forever, and then actually that this is nothing to do with his salaries, the amount of the salary he receives, but just because she is not working big amount of money or a little bit of amount of 1 million yen, then he receive a little bit of benefit. Even though he making $1 million a year, still he received that benefit. So we have to rethink about that. A little bit of small things that here and there are a lot of tricks that the women is like a belonging is to the husband, and one family is unity. And it also that the Japanese has a very unique registration system, koseki, so that when you marry, that you kind of like and also choose one family name. 99% of the family choose husband name, and then some of the politicians think that if women keep the maiden name after marriage, divorce rate would increase. And then they've been there's no logic to it, but the 30 years, 50 years we were working on it, but never changed the regulation. So here and there we have a lot of the tricks in daily life that women's are belongings to men's, or a family unit and husband is stronger and women is a little smaller. So that kind of things that we have to kind of like untangle it one by one and start thinking freely to choose. I mean, I'm not saying that those are bad, but that it's a lack of freedom to choose.
Here? Sorry, hang on one moment.
So I was reading the newspaper this morning, and the Nippon Kaigi has suggested creating a constitutional definition of the family, and has suggested Sazae-san as the ideal Japanese family, which seemed like a fairly old example. What do you think the ideal family looks like in the future, and where would we look in the media for examples of that?
Question. For me personally, the ideal family or ideal life for any human being is doing what you want to do, and you are unable to do what you want to do. So when I got married to my husband, we had a discussion before, and they said, okay, if we want to pursue whatever we want to pursue, which may be unpaid, we'll negotiate, and whichever one of us will take a break, and the other person need to be breadwinner. Right? It's mutual, and we'll try to rotate. So that was the agreement when we entered into the marriage. I kind of recommend this to everyone, right? Or any kind of partnership, because well, it's a little troublesome if both of us don't work at the same time. But if we both want to work, it's our choice. We both like to work, then we have to make it work. And if one person don't want to work, like be my guest, right? I'm trying to persuade my husband not to work, and he's trying to persuade me not to work, and we were not unsuccessful about it. So we are like, okay, we'll both work because we like to work, but we have to make it happen. But that requires lots of help from community, society, my boss, my team, and we are not hesitant to ask for help. And I want everyone to be in that boat. And because at the end of the day, ideal family, ideal individual life is you die thinking that you did what you wanted to do, right? So I don't want to form the shape of the family in any way. I think any form is possible. But if you did what you wanted to do in your life, that's the ideal shape of the family. That's what I think.
To that, obviously, I have a comparative disadvantage on this panel, being neither woman nor Japanese. So I can't really speak for the Japanese women, but my mother wrote this book about Japanese professional housewives, so I will try to build on her research. I guess the only point I'd make is what you're getting with the Nippon Kaigi is that even though I totally agree with Shie that obviously we'd like a world where families and individuals get to make their choice about what their own ideal family is, and the country and the company isn't making those decisions for them. The kind of post-war ideal, maybe that was never realized, but was a very powerful ideal of a male breadwinner family with a professional housewife maybe multi-generational, with the parents either living with the family or close by. That still kind of lingers over Japanese society as an ideal, even though people are trying to kind of get past it. It lingers in the policies, right? Even as they're changing, right? The tax policy is a perfect example of something that was designed for a male breadwinner society that hasn't changed. The corporate practices that we've been talking about, the values of some people. And also, again, I can't speak for Japanese women, but I certainly hear a lot of Japanese women talk about a kind of an internal conflict between the desire to be a powerful, successful career woman, and yet that kind of the lingering that they're just not going to be as good, mother or wife as their mother or their grandmother. In other words, that kind of social, even though they don't really personally embrace it, they kind of feel it in the atmosphere, and that is still there.
I personally think that the issue is what is the model family is that the Japanese government is still looking for what a model family is. That is the issue, that there should be a variety of different families should be there. And even a school text have all those husband is a father sitting there, mother sitting sides, and two children at the table. And those are illustrations on the textbook. Or if you have a mother's day to come to the schools to look the class, visiting school days, usually mother comes, and because it's set in the daytime, and the father wouldn't come. So, I mean, a lot of things, and again, like the family is government or school system think that one family style is the model. But I think it's about time that Japan has to understand that there are a variety of family style.
Other questions?
Thank you. So I think the U.S. mindset about gender seems to be more fluid than that of Japan, or at least that's the general perception. But here in Silicon Valley, tech companies are suffering from the gender and race diversity. And I think we have a lot to learn from this panel about that. And I wondered, and yet Japan is sending a lot of companies, their staff, to learn how to do design thinking or how to do innovation the Silicon Valley way. And I wondered why you think that is, and what, if any, Japan is learning from the Silicon Valley way of innovation?
Yeah, very good question. So it's a challenge for us in the US and in Japan, probably more in Japan. The education of STEM, the science and technology, is hard to broaden it to female, mainly because I think there is an entry barrier initially, and it was traditionally male dominant. In Japan, it's more prominent that I think you often hear rikejo as a unique thing. Rikejo meaning that the women who studied science or who are into science and engineering and stuff. And it shouldn't be a unique thing, and we want to change it. So we have the program, the exact name, the Mind the Gap program in Google. And what we are trying to do is bring the middle school and high school girls to the office and teach them programming, and also tour around the office and meet the female engineers and show the role model. Because if you never see female scientists in the movies or TV shows or cartoons when you grow up, you try not to, you don't even think about it, you'll be one, right? Or a mathematician or engineer. And I think Hollywood is trying to change it. They're introducing a lot more female character who is in the STEM field. And I think as a parent and as their private sector managers, we have to encourage that, and we have the program to encourage that. But I think if society as a whole put that, that's an equal opportunity thing, and whoever interested in whatever interesting should be seeking for it. I think that would really help Silicon Valley as well as Japan, and I think innovation should come from really diverse group, including women.
Anything else?
hold on.
There's a lot of people that are working to impact change, and clearly one group in particular isn't going to make that change. But if we talk about shareholders and investor proposals, I know this is a little slightly esoteric, but you've seen shareholder proposals about, replacing board members, and then you have votes on we need to have more diversity in the boardroom. But could you see this going as far as investors playing a role in making the difference by shareholder proposal activism in Japan? And would you see that as a possibility where investors would actually believe that it's that important that companies be more diverse and set their women targets, or is that just something that can't even be comprehended? I know I've seen some shareholder proposals regarding like the contractors versus the temp. We should eliminate this because it causes, a divide. I think I saw a few of those. But in terms of ever really taking a stance that we have to see more diversity in Japan's workforce.
If I understand correctly, but in Japan that you know that it's the famous data that more women on board have a better ROE in general, and the more women in the management place, that then the more benefit and profit in the company. So that the investors' point of view that when the companies have more women in the advancement role, have more profitability. And then in Japan, that the Tosho, Tosho is what? Tokyo Stock Exchange has the Nadeshiko Megara, which is the name of the group of the company that who has those women in the advancement. They put kind of like a certificate and seal to certain companies that this is a company that who is doing a lot of effort on women in advancement, and then those companies are performing better than the others. So that from the investment point of view, I guess the women in advancement is catching up in Japan as well.
I'm just going to answer this speculatively, but obviously, as I know you know, there's big changes happening in Japanese corporate governance, and the expectation is that every company will have multiple outside directors. So I guess what I would suggest is I think it's unlikely that the mechanism would be the investor pressure on the company to change, directly influencing its practices with respect to women. What I think is much more likely is that the combination of investor pressure plus the legislative and code changes are going to create more female directors. That's why Kaori's on 5 or more boards.
And her qualification for being on those boards.
That's right. That's right. And she and her colleagues will be hopefully pushing Japanese companies to change their practices. I think those outside directors, and particularly the female outside directors, would be an important voice for changing practices within companies.
I'll just add one personal comment. So we have to imagine how many companies make products or services, offer services that's only used by men, first of all, right? Like not many I can think of. Then what does it mean? Like the people who are producing those products or services shouldn't be just men, right? Because that totally doesn't make any sense. You have to have the user need. You have to understand what the customer values are. And that alone, I think, should add enough value and needs for women to be included in those decisions.
We have 1 minute. Let me ask one question of each of you. If you had one piece of advice, please.
I would like to ask you about more sort of wider participation, voluntary participation of Japanese women, often after the children finish the school. I have seen lots of my friends, other, say, middle-aged women, entering voluntary activities, say, NPO or whatever they are called. They often form their own groups, not necessarily recognized by the local government or not. I have seen over many years this kind of participation has spread quite widely among so-called Japanese women and families, including men too, what would you see or evaluate this kind of sort of first step in public activities lead to more change in Japanese society in terms of gender change, or more sort of the women and men getting out of their own family work or into more sort of wider space?
I'll take a stab at that. I don't think that's anything new. In other words, that Japanese women have actually been the dominant participants in many civic organizations throughout Japanese history. You have the Housewives Federation. In other words, most consumer organizations are dominated by women. Most neighborhood associations are probably dominated by women. Many of the kind of parapublic volunteer organizations are also dominated by women. So in order for that to become an engine of change, I think that those groups would have to change in terms of their nature. But I guess what I'm suggesting is that, first of all, historically, they haven't all tended to be progressive. Some of them have been quite conservative. So they haven't necessarily been agents of social change. That's not true of all of them. I'm just saying that it's not across the board that they're necessarily an agent of change. Secondly, there's been an orientation more towards civic participation rather than political participation. So Japanese environmental groups or whatever are more oriented towards doing things than changing policies, right? So again, if that legacy continues, then those organizations are not necessarily agents for kind of global, right, change in like particularly organizations that are even interested in issues of rights, like immigration, for example, as you know, tend to be more service-oriented rather than lobby groups. So I guess what I'm saying is that it depends on what those women's groups want, right, what they're pushing for, and secondly, how they're doing it, right? If they're not agents for change, and if they're not politically oriented, then they aren't going to be the engines of change that maybe you would hope that they would be.
I really put a lot of value in volunteering and NPO and so forth, and I've been doing that myself. But the reason I created ewoman as an incorporation, not NPO, I actually thought about becoming an NPO, but I realized that finally that when you are doing voluntary work, men give me a big applause. And, Sasaki-san doing great, and your idea is great. And they just, maybe give me a little bit of applause, but not really paying me or anything, right? And then they are selling one pen for $1. They are charging a lot of things by selling product. And then actually those people are making decisions and making policies. So that I decided to make incorporated because that I thought it's really a worthwhile playing together in the same league with them, in the same rule with them, so that they can finally listen to what we are doing as their own, same league. As he just mentions that so many women are actually on purpose and focus on doing things, but not really interested in making changes in policies and so forth, which are actually dominant by men. So I think that a lot of women who are doing that, such great things, great work to the society, need to learn how to talk to men, and when and how, and then to include men or having men to open up their mind to change policies and include those NPO to a better place.
Let's just finish with one question. We have to wrap. For each of you, if you had one piece of advice for the people in the room, what would it be? Kaori, you have a mic in your hand, so we'll start with you.
talk about it and hear about it and think about this kind of issues. And I like all of the people who are in the United States would give us a very friendly, good gaiatsu, foreign pressure to Japan, because that Japan is now moving and really seriously moving forward. I'd like you to talk about it whenever you meet Japanese people visiting U.S. That wow, you're doing Japan is taking a leadership in the women advancement diversity. What do you do, and what are your companies doing, so that that kind of the good foreign pressures, and then work together.
So I think there's a cycle to make things to result. So I think you have to first start with awareness, as Kaori said. Please raise your awareness, right? And then once you're aware, you have to intend to do things. So awareness goes to intention. And once you have intention, it turns into action. And I want to see actions in everyone's agenda. And if we have this awareness and intention action, I know results coming. So I think we are in great time, like in Japan and in the US, that all the leadership is supporting, the change is coming, and I think every one of us can be change agent. So, and you being here already kind of proves me that you are interested. So I think every one of us should be change agent and bring it to the action. And that's one thing that it's advice for me and advice for you.
Well, I certainly don't feel qualified to give this group any advice, but I guess if we kind of collectively think of ourselves as American, mostly American observers of Japan, I guess it's our role is to be nuanced, subtle, and sophisticated interpreters, and try to break through some of the stereotypes. I think in terms of the United States, like perceptions of Japanese women, they can go either way. They can either be overly traditional, they can exaggerate the extent to which Japan is still a traditional society, or they can exaggerate the level of change. And it's actually very complex. What we're seeing, today is that it's a very complex mix of movement forward and real problems. And we have to look at, kind of look at the fine-grained detail. I mean, I guess I've been talking or studying the Japanese government, so maybe I'll finish on that, which is that the level of attention is fantastic. Some of the policies, particularly some of the ones that are currently being considered that haven't been implemented yet, I think are a huge step forwards. But kind of what Kaori was saying is we shouldn't, that's still not enough. I mean, I think that, for instance, for childcare, the budgets are still insufficient. For equal pay for equal work, the enforcement is still insufficient. So there's still more work to do.
Please thank our panel.